Good morning from UN Women Training Center to everybody. Good afternoon and good evening in other parts of the world. My name is Kamsawat Jantawisok or Kam. I'm a training and capacity development specialist and the course coordinator for this online moderated course on care economy. Today, I'm pleasure to be here with you, and it's an honor to introduce you to two of our excellent moderators for our moderated course. It's the first webinar as part of the longer series of our webinar, part of the moderated course on care economy organized by UN Women Training Center. Today's lecture will be started by Dr. Amaya Perez Orozco, and she's going to introduce the basic concept and basic knowledge and understanding on care economy. So it's the first lecture of the edition for our course. Allow me to introduce to you Dr. Amaya. Dr. Amaya Perez Orozco holds a PhD on International Economics and Development. She's an expert on public equality policies. She has a broad training experience in formal education programs and professional ongoing training. She has also a broad policy-oriented research experience within academia and for international institutions. She has been collaborating with UN Women, particularly UN Women Training Center since 2007 in both training and policy-oriented research on the following topics: gender, development and migration, feminist economics, and the care economy and the global care chains. Dr. Amaya Perez Orozco has led this care economic course for us for the last 3 years, and this is the 4th year. So for me, we are very proud to have her back again, and she's been working hard to prepare for this course. She has been working a lot on promoting profound changes in the current unjust social organization of care, and she's going to introduce some of the concept to us. I would like also to introduce to you the co-moderator for this course, Dr. Alba Atequia Leras. She will be also moderating today's sessions. Dr. Alba is an economist, and she holds a PhD in sociology from the Complutense University of Madrid. Her professional and personal activity is mainly focused on research and teaching in the field of public policies, gender, care, and feminist economy. Currently, she works as a teacher of sociology at the Complutense University of Madrid. To cut short so that you can spend more time with Dr. Amaya, I'll hand over the session to Alba, and I hope you enjoy today's discussion. The session will be recorded, and if you missed it out, we will upload it online. Hope you have a good session. Thank you very much. Alba, please.
Okay, thank you, Cam. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first online lecture on care economy. I am Alba Artiaga, one of the co-moderators of the course, together with Amaya, and today I will moderate the Q&A section. And firstly, I will briefly explain to you how to use this GoToWebinar platform. As you can see in the slide, there is a blue button that allows you to view the presentation in full screen, that it could be more comfortable for you. Then if you see that the console is in the way of presentation, you can dock it by clicking the orange arrow. And if you want to see again the console, you can simply click on the orange arrow again, okay? Then, how can you interact today in the Q&A section? There are 2 ways for interacting. The first one is typing your questions in a box, and the second one is that you can talk to the audience, okay, to make your questions. So for the first option, you can type your questions in a section at the bottom area of the console. You can click on the plus symbol to see the questions, more visible, and you will be able to see a box that will appear where you will be able to type your questions, and you can do that at any time during the conference, okay? So at the end of the conference, I will recover all these questions and I will show them to the audience and also to the speaker. Then the second way to interact today is that you can ask your questions with your own voice, and for that you can click in that icon with the little hand that and we will unmute your microphone, so you will be able to speak. We encourage you to do that, but if there is any problem with your voice, we will ask you to type your questions in the box, that it will be easier. Okay, so we will do that at the end. Okay, you can use this mode only at the end of the conference at the Q&A section, okay? So that's all. I don't want to take more time from Amaya, so okay, go ahead, Amaya, and welcome everybody to the section.
Thanks very much both Alba and Cam for the introduction, and welcome to everyone. We are happy to be with you sharing this first online lecture on the care economy, in which we will introduce basic concepts so that we've got a common floor to go on discussing more in depth other questions in the next lectures. So today we will do a first approach to basic notions about care, and I wanted to begin by giving you an example on how is care being increasingly organized nowadays at the global level. And I wanted you to think about, for example, a woman in Europe or in North America or in so many Asian countries or almost anywhere in the world who's got a full-time employment and who's also a mother of a couple or 3 children, and she lives in a place where childcare centers are not affordable, or the schedules of the childcare centers do not fit her working schedules. So she decided to hire a domestic worker who will probably be a migrant woman who might have left behind her in the country of origin her children, being cared for by, for example, a grandmother. So these kind of care transfers, which are led by women, are usually called global care chains. Of course, global care chains usually are much more complex than this basic example, but this basic example helps us to think to firstly approach care. It talks us about care as those activities that we do on a daily basis to sustain our lives and to reproduce the human factor. These global care chains talks us also talks us about gender inequality, because women are the ones who are mostly active providing care. But where are men? We can do this question. We can make this question, and men are also present here. Men are receiving the benefits of care provision, but they are not assuming the costs in the same way as women are. We could say the same about the state and about enterprises. So those chains talks us about the absences and the presences in care provision. They also speak to us about gender inequality and about global inequalities based on class and ethnicity, on migration status. So they talks us about inequality in a broader sense. And finally, those global care chains are directly a call for action, because they are showing us that care is a question of utmost importance in terms of rights-based human development, and I will come back to that point later, also in terms of gender equality, or rather gender inequality, and also in terms of economic performance. And I would try to argue that along my presentation. So, just for you to know the flow of the argument that we will do today. First, we will discuss some basic notions on care to understand what care is. Second, we will wonder about care systems, what questions we need to ask to understand how care systems operate. We need to understand care needs and also care provision. And then we will move forward to explain why we say that current care systems are mostly, and despite their differences, unjust. So we can talk about the unfairness of current care systems. If current care systems are unfair, we need to change that. So fourthly, we will discuss how to move forward and how to move towards what we will call the right to care and to co-responsibility. Finally, I will very briefly argue that we are facing a window of opportunity, that many things are taking place today, and that this is the moment to change because care is already changing. So first of all, what is care? What basic notions can we use to understand and to approach this topic? When we talk about care, we are referring to all those activities that are necessary to recreate day after day the physical and also the emotional well-being of people. So we are talking about physical and emotional well-being on a daily basis. We might use other terms as well, because you might ask about the differences between care and domestic work, between care work and reproductive work or reproductive labor, and also what has care to do with unpaid work. The first thing that we need to say is that all those terms, all those diverse terms, have a common aim. All of them are aimed at bringing to light work that has been historically associated with women, so historically mostly done by women, that has been historically performed free of charge or for scant wages, and which sustains the lives of others. So all those different terms, they've got some particularities and some differences between them, but we can use any of them alternatively to refer to this work mostly done by women, free of charge or poorly paid, and that is critical for sustaining life and for sustaining the whole socioeconomic system. So we can use the notion of care or any of other of those terms to refer to bring to light what we can say is the gender invisible base of development. So understanding care means trying to understand how the human factor is reproduced, instead of taking for granted that the human factor comes out of the blue, let's say. So we try to understand how human life is reproduced on a daily basis. And in this sense, we can say that caring about care means approaching the socioeconomic system from a bottom-up perspective. Because first of all, we try to understand how human life is reproduced, and then we wonder what we do with this life, what kind of market economy, what kind of political system, culture, history, whatever. But first of all, we need to understand how people come to be. So this is what care tries to bring to light. We might classify the dimensions of any caring activity according to the following classification that you are seeing in your screens. We can say that any caring activity has three dimensions: direct care, preconditions for care, and mental management. So first of all, direct care. This refers to those tasks that involve direct interaction between people in the interest of physical and emotional health. So this implies creating a human bond, a human relationship. Let's think, for example, on an elder person with Alzheimer who cannot feed her or himself, and we need to feed him or her. So this would be direct care. Also feeding a child, a little child, who cannot take the food on her or his own. But for doing this, for this type of direct care to happen, first we need to obtain the food, to cook it, to have a clean kitchen. So we have to set what we call the preconditions for care. And these are the tasks that lay out the material conditions which then allow for direct care to take place. So sometimes we refer to those preconditions for care as domestic work. So let's say domestic work would lay out the material conditions that allow for direct care to happen. But when using the notion of care in a broad sense, we are including both direct care and domestic work. And finally, a third dimension is that one of mental management, because all the activities that I've just mentioned need a process of coordination, of planning and supervision. So planning what we are going to eat, planning when we are going to obtain the food, and ensuring that the meal is on the table at the right time and for the right people. This is a very arduous work that is quite difficult to think how much time it takes you, but that takes a lot of mental work, let's say. So these are the three dimensions of care, and they are present in any caring activity. Where can care be provided? This is another question that we may ask for a first approach, in a first approach to care. First, we need to say that caregiving can be both paid or unpaid. So we can talk about the work done by, for example, a domestic worker, and we can also talk about the unpaid care work that most of us, we do on a daily basis in our households or in the community. And where can care happen? Care can be provided both within households, in what we call the domestic sphere, and also outside from households, in what we call the public sphere. Moving forward, the next question that we need to make, who needs care? And we need to clearly state that all of us, we always need care in a daily basis. Although for long periods of our life, we are able to take care of ourselves and to take care of others, and we might not need anyone to feed us, for example, we might not need anyone to do this direct care for us. We still need to set the preconditions for care, and also we need to do all this process of mental management. So all of us, we always need care, although in care of different types, in different dimensions, and with different intensity, depending on a series of factors such as age, so we need a life cycle perspective to understand care, also on physical and mental conditions. It's not the same if we are ill or if we are healthy, and also material conditions. So for example, if we've got time to cook for ourselves, or if we've got a so demanding job that we don't even have time to cook the most basic things for ourselves. And who can provide care? We can say more or less the same. Almost all of us, during most of our lifetime, we can do some care activities. We can do those care activities for others and also for ourselves. So we should stop thinking that the population is divided into two different groups. One group of self-sufficient people who take care of themselves and care for the dependent people. So we shouldn't think about those two separate groups, but we should rather think that all of us, we are placed in a continuum between situations of rather of greater autonomy, in which we are more able to take care of ourselves and to give some care to others, and situations of greater, of higher dependence, in which we are more in need of others' care and less able to provide care for ourselves and for others. But we should think about interdependence rather than thinking on self-sufficiency as opposed to dependency. So we say we are interdependent because all of us, we need care, and during most of our lifetime we can provide care for others. So if we are interdependent, we should be co-responsible for care. Care should be a responsibility shared among all of us according to our circumstances and to our position in the life cycle. What's the problem? The problem, the critical issue, is that because care is not valued and is not properly compensated, those who can avoid it do not assume their share of co-responsibility. They just transfer their share of co-responsibility to others. And as we will see, this is what happens in unfair care systems. Because care is undervalued, care is not fairly shared, and co-responsibility doesn't exist. And a final concept that we need to take into account to understand care is the very concept of the care economy. What do we mean when we talk about the care economy? First, we say that care is the base for all market economy, because without care, we simply don't have investors, consumers, or workers. So without care, there is no human life, and without human life, there is not market economy. But beyond that, we say that care itself is part of the economy in two senses. First, because care is a necessity for all persons, and to cover this need, resources are required, and the economy is about producing resources needed to solve human needs. So in this sense, care is part of the economy. And care is part of the economy as well because it is work. It requires time, it requires energy, it requires knowledge. And providing care has opportunity costs because it takes time away from other activities. So because care is about producing resources to solve these needs, and because care is work, care is itself part of the economy, although the bulk of care work is unpaid. And this implies that we are broadening our notion, our very notion of the economy. We say that the economy is not only about markets and about money, but that the economy is about all the processes that produce the resources that are needed to sustain life and to solve human needs, whether they happen within markets or outside from markets. So in all those senses, we should talk about the care economy as part of any economic system. So moving forward, how is care organized? How can we understand care systems? To understand care systems, we need to understand what is the balance or the unbalance between care needs present in any given society and the way in which this society tries to provide for these care needs, so the care provision. So first of all, we need to understand care needs, and then we need to ask who is providing this needed care. And we can use for this the metaphor of what is called the care diamond, which refers to the four main actors that can play a role in care provision. I'm saying that might play a role, but it does not mean that they actually are taking an active role in care provision. And those four actors are the following ones. First, households and families. Second, the state, public institutions. Third, markets and private companies. And fourth, the community, civil society organizations, NGOs, this broad third sector, let's say. And a fifth agent that we should mention is domestic employment, paid domestic work, which is halfway between households and markets. So first we need to understand care needs, and then we need to ask about how this care diamond works and who of those 4 or 5 actors are playing an active role in care provision. So going to the first question, what are the care needs of any given society? To understand that, first we need to attend to the age composition of that society. For example, care needs in Europe and in Africa are totally different because in Africa the population is really young, while in Europe the population is really aged and is facing an aging process. So the care needs of Africa and of Europe are different, but in both places care needs are great, let's say. And we need to understand this age composition from a dynamic perspective. So it means that we should not focus only on what is happening now, but that we should try to foresee what is going to happen in the future. And in this sense, the critical phenomenon that we are facing at the global level is what we call the population aging process. So globally speaking, we are facing a population aging process in which the percentage of people aged 60 or over is constantly and dramatically increasing, and not only in developed countries, but also in developing countries. So for example, to think about care implies that we need to discuss how we are going to face the challenge of population aging. And a second question, beyond this one on the age composition of the society that we need to ask in order to understand care needs, is whether there are any urgent or intensified care needs in that society. And for example, here what many countries face is the HIV/AIDS pandemic, which implies an urgent need for care, an intensified need for care, and at the same time a shortage of people who can provide care. But also this type of urgent care needs can be found in places that are facing armed conflict or that are living post-conflict processes in which there's a high prevalence of disability, for example, of mental illnesses, etc. So broadly speaking, the age composition, and beyond that, whether there are any urgent or intensified care needs. And once we have understood care needs, we need to ask about care provision. And of the 4 factors of the care diamond that I just mentioned before, I wanted to focus on 2 of them because they are the most relevant ones, let's say, the state and households, families. We could say, broadly speaking, that the bigger the role that the state plays, the smaller the responsibility that finally falls onto households, and the other way around. The smaller the role that the state plays and the smaller that the responsibility that the state assumes, the bigger the responsibility that is finally assumed in households. So, what is the state currently doing, and how can we understand the role that the state is playing? To understand the role that the state plays, first we need to ask about the overall orientation of the development model. Is it a development model that prioritizes market processes? So let's say a market-led development model, or is it a development model that prioritizes the production of well-being? So although we don't have time to go in depth into this point, we need to keep in mind that asking about care means asking about the broad macroeconomic orientation of the development model. Beyond that, we need to understand that there are no care-neutral policies. Similarly to what we say about gender, that there are no gender-neutral policies, but what we usually find is gender-blind policies, we should say that there are no care-neutral policies, although we frequently find care-blind policies. For example, educational policy can be care-blind but no care-neutral. We can use educational policy to teach children in a fair sharing of care work and care responsibilities. So we could introduce the notion that care work is a very valuable job that should be fairly shared among the whole population. Another example of the lack of neutrality of policies could be that one of urban planning, for example. So a process of urbanization in which the different places in which we lead our daily life, like for example, working places, the health center, the school, the home, the shopping centers are far away from each other and scattered all around the city, which implies that we devote a lot of time to commuting, for example, and that it's really difficult to establish collective networks for sharing care. So this process of urbanization has a direct negative impact in our ability to build daily care arrangements that are easy, let's say. So urban planning has a direct impact also in the way in which we can organize care. And third, and the most obvious, we need to ask about care policies. And there are different ways in which we can classify care policies. I'm going to classify them according to the sphere they impact. As I said before, care can happen within the domestic sphere or in the public sphere. So we can think about care policies that impact care within the households. So there are a series of policies that might improve the conditions for caring at home, the conditions for unpaid care work done within the households. For example, there are policies that can encourage a fairer redistribution of care between women and men. For example, by changing the laws, by ensuring that both wife and husband have the same rights and duties. Also, other policies that might imply a process of awareness raising, for example, by encouraging fathers to take care of the children. So responsible fatherhood awareness raising campaigns. There are also some other interventions that can compensate for the unpaid care done at home. So those type of interventions are usually called money for care. So for example, a cash transfer might be given to some unpaid career within the household. And finally, what is critical here is ensuring that the whole population access basic infrastructure, because the access to running water, to electricity, to sanitation, to waste collection, this has a direct impact in the amount of care work that we do and in the amount of time that we devote mostly to domestic work and to setting the preconditions for care. So if we do not have electricity at home, we might devote hours every day, 1 or 2 hours every day to fetch wood, for example. So by providing infrastructure, we can make much more easier the process of caregiving. A second set of policy is that are those policies that facilitate the interaction between the domestic sphere and the public sphere. And here, what is critical to bear in mind is that the labor market has a tendency to ask workers a full commitment and full flexibility to respond to the company's needs in terms of their time and of their mobility. So let's say private companies usually ask for fully available workers, and what we can ask if workers are fully available for the company's needs when they are going to have time and to have mobility to solve their own care needs and mostly to solve their care responsibilities. So there are a series of policies that can impact in this way, and these are so-called work-life balance policies. They can, on the one hand, they can free time from employment to devote this time to unpaid care within the household. And the most common ones here are maternity, paternity, and parental leave. But there are also some other policies that might encourage flexible working arrangements, so that companies arrange the working day and the working space in order for workers to have more possibilities to answer to their care responsibilities. And a third set of policies, of care policies, are those ones that take care provision out from household and put it directly in the public sphere. So here we're talking about public care services, whether they are child care centers or long-term care centers for the elderly or whatever. And we can also talk about those policies that encourage or oblige private companies to set care services even in the very workplace. So for example, workplace child care centers. So there are diverse care policies that we can implement so that the state has a more active role in care provision. What can we see at the global level nowadays? We can see that there is a positive trend in terms of implementing more and more care policies. This figure shows the evolution and the tendencies of some of the critical care policies during the past 30 years, from 1975 till 2005. And as we can see, there has been a positive tendency of a higher percentage of countries implementing paid maternity leave, this is the blue line, parental leave, which is the orange line, and child care services, which is the green line. So there's a positive trend, and this is most welcome, but we should say, and we should clearly state that this is still insufficient. This is still insufficient because usually those type of care policies are implemented from a partial approach. So they are not a comprehensive set of care policies, and those care policies are disconnected from what we said, the macroeconomic approach, or other policies that are not thought to have anything to do with care. They are insufficient also in the sense that they are mostly targeted at women. So we can see that, for example, clearly in the extreme imbalance between maternity and paternity leave. They are also insufficient or inadequate in the sense that they frequently rely on poorly paid or unpaid care work. For example, many child care centers, care services are based on very poorly paid women's care work, for example, of the so-called community mothers in many countries. And finally, because this is a very vulnerable expenditure, and during the last crisis, we have clearly seen that. So the public budget devoted to care policies has been among the first items to be cut when having to reduce public expenditure. So the role of the state is increasing, but it's still clearly insufficient. So who is providing care nowadays? It is households, and it is women within households. So households are the main actor in care provision at a global level nowadays. Duran, who is an economist, invites us to think about households as workshops that produce care services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. She says that we need to think and we need to take into account those 2,000 million workshops producing services round the clock at the margin of the market. So there is where the bulk of the responsibility for care provision relies. So households are the critical actor in care provision, and we need to remember that when talking about households, we are talking about a diversity of forms of families, so not only wife, husband, and children. Households are very diverse, and we need to take this diversity into account. And we also need to always remember that their households are cross-cut by a pervasive gender division of labor. So who does the bulk of unpaid care work done within the households? It is women, globally speaking, who do this work. So in that figure, you can see how men and women share the responsibility for unpaid work within the household. And despite differences between different regions, what we can see is that in everywhere, let's say, it is women who do the bulk of unpaid care. And this women's disproportionate share of unpaid care work is seriously damaging their labor market position. So this is a critical reason impacting women's lives and women's right to a decent job, and also to reproducing and recreating women's poverty worldwide. So what we have nowadays is that it is households and it is women within households who are doing this poorly paid or directly unpaid care work, because there is not a full responsibility of states, although it's improving a bit, and because also neither the community nor the enterprises are assuming a serious responsibility, let's say. So that's why we say that what we have to nowadays are unjust care systems. When talking about unjust care systems, we are referring to those care systems that share three common characteristics. First, the lack of co-responsibility. Second, the understanding that care is a women's issue. And third, the systemic nexus between care and inequality. Let me explain a bit more these three common characteristics. First, unjust care systems are defined by the lack of co-responsibility. What do we mean by that? When we say that there is no co-responsibility, what we are saying is that there is a lack of collective structures that provide care, so that neither state nor private companies or the community or the non-for-profit sector is assuming a full responsibility for care. This is linked to the fact that care is recognized neither as a dimension of well-being to be collectively guaranteed, nor as a work that must be compensated for by the whole society. So when collective structures to provide care are lacking, where does care rely? Care finally relies onto households. So it is households with unequal resources who are solving care needs. And when we talk about unequal resources, we are saying that there are households that only have their own time for doing unpaid care work. So they have to decide who within the household is devoting their lives to unpaid care work. So who cannot go to the labor market or go to the school or go into politics or whatever. But there are other households that have money and that can combine unpaid care work with buying care services, whether it is a domestic worker's job or whether this is other kind of private care services. So we can say that in unjust care systems, the two pillars of care provision are, on the one hand, women's unpaid care work within the households, and on the other hand, women's domestic employment, women's paid domestic work. And so we need to remember those 2,000 million workshops producing care services round the clock on the one hand, and on the other hand, these between 53 and 100 million domestic workers a number that is increasing at the global level. These are numbers, data provided by the International Labour Organization. So of those 100 million domestic workers, which is the second pillar, who make up the second pillar of care provision in unjust care systems, 83% of them are women, according to the ILO. And we always need to remember that that domestic work is linked to the world history of slavery, of colonialism, and of other forms of servitude. So the first characteristic of unjust care systems is that there is a lack of co-responsibility, of full co-responsibility. The second common characteristic of unjust care systems is that care is understood to be a women's issue, so that care is profoundly linked to gender inequality. What do we mean when saying that? First, that caregiving is not considered proper work. It is considered the natural activity inherent to good women. So good women just care out from love, but they are not working. At the same time, care is not considered a man's responsibility. Men are rather expected to be breadwinners. And this unfair distribution of this type of tasks, of, let's say, market work and unpaid care work, which is not considered work, as I said, deeply hinders women's ability to enjoy other rights. So this impacts, in a broader sense, their whole lives. This hinders their ability to enjoy the right to decent employment, to education. Many girls around the world drop out from school because of their caring responsibilities. Also, women's right to political participation, to social security, because doing unpaid care work do not allow you to access socioeconomic rights, also to health, etc. So it has a direct and negative impact on women's living conditions and women's ability to enjoy a full set of rights. But again, we need to remember that not all women are located in the same position. We also find unequal transfers among women, as in the first example of global care chains. And this takes us to the third point. So the third characteristic of unjust care system is that there is a systemic nexus between care and inequality. So as we've just said, care is linked to gender inequality, but it is also linked to other inequalities, such as class inequality, inequality based on ethnicity, on the rural-urban division, on migration status, etc. Beyond that, we can say that different social groups access care of unequal quality, so of unequal quantity, but also of unequal quality. So we can say that there are some social groups that access what we could call decent care, so care that is enough in terms of quantity, that is rewarding or fulfilling in terms of quality, and that is freely chosen. So freely chosen care arrangements. There are some social groups that have access to this type of decent care. But there are other social groups that suffer from precarious care arrangements, so insufficient, not quality enough, or not freely chosen. And even beyond that, what we need to say is that the access of some social groups to decent care usually is thanks to others' precarious care arrangements. So care is arranged along unequal transfers. Those who provide more receive less, let's say. So there are unequal care transfers from women to men, from worse-off social classes to upper classes, from migrants to autochthonous population, and broadly speaking, from the global south to the global north. So these are, as I said, the three characteristics of unjust care systems: the lack of co-responsibility, the understanding that care is a women's issue which hinders women's rights, and the care inequality nexus in this broad sense of inequality. So this being the situation, we want to make a change. So where do we want to move towards? We say that we want to move from current unjust care systems to what we could call a rights-based global care system. This rights-based global care system should guarantee, first, universal decent care, so care which is enough in terms of quantity, which is fulfilling in terms of quality, which is freely chosen, and universal decent care for all, that's why it's universal, should be at the heart of human development. Because if human development is about expanding the richness of human life and improving the lives that people lead, the very first thing is to reproduce these lives in a daily basis. So universal decent care at the heart of human development should be guaranteed by these rights-based global care systems. And so should be gender equality. This type of envisioned rights-based global care system would be based on on two pillars, let's say. First, what we can call the right to care, together with ensuring labor rights in the care sector. What do we mean when we talk about the right to care? We are talking about a right to receive the care that we need in different moments of our life cycles, so to receive the different types of care that we need along our lives, and also the right to choose about care provision. First, the right to take care for our beloved ones if we want to, and do so in decent conditions, and that this does not imply that we cannot enjoy from other rights, and also the right to reject care, the right not to care if caring for others implies that we cannot enjoy other basic rights. So together, this right to choose over care provision and to receive care make up to the right to care. So the first pillar of this kind of rights-based global care system would be the right to care, together with labor rights in the care sector, because what we cannot accept is that some people, for example, receive care thanks to the violation of labor rights in the care sector. For example, the violation of labor rights of domestic workers. So this is the first pillar of that envisioned rights-based global care system, and the second one would be co-responsibility. If we are talking about a universal right to care, we should also be talking about a universal duty to care. So because care is a reality of interdependence, all of us, we should do our share. We should pull our weight. So care should be a responsibility equally shared by all social actors, households, the state, companies, and the civil society, and among all the citizens, between women and men, and between women and men of different social ethnic groups, etc. So the right to care goes hand in hand with the notion of co-responsibility. How can we move towards this, at the same time, towards this right to care and towards this notion of co-responsibility? We need to implement what we can call a dual policy strategy, or a two-pronged strategy. First, we need a comprehensive and structural set of care policies. We have been already talking about the different types of care policies that we can implement, and we need to use all those tools, or the more adequate tools for different contexts, but we need to do so in a coordinated way, instead of approving and implementing scattered care policies. So first of all, we need a comprehensive and a structural set of care policies. But at the same time, we need to mainstream an objective of moving toward these kind of fair care systems into any policy, because if there are no care neutral policies, we need that all policies help us to move toward these type of care systems in which the right to care and co-responsibility are a reality. And sometimes we refer to this as mainstreaming what we call the 4 R's objective into the 4 R's of care objective into any policy. What are the 4 R's of care? This is the objective about care that we want to mainstream into any policy. So first, recognize care. Second, reduce precarious care arrangements. Third, redistribute care. And fourth, represent care workers and care receivers. So first of all, we want policies to help us to recognize care as a job that must be compensated for, as a need, and that we need to produce the resources needed to cover this need, and as a critical dimension of everyone's life, So it's not a women's issue, it's not a dependence issue. It's an issue about the lives of all of us, of all the citizenship. So first thing is recognizing care. Second, once we have recognized care, we need to reduce precarious care arrangements. So it's not about getting rid of care work, it's not about reducing any type of care arrangement, it's about reducing precarious care arrangements so that we can enjoy from decent care arrangement as critical dimension and fulfilling dimensions of our lives as well. So we need to reduce precarious care arrangements. This means that we need to reduce or to completely withdraw the most arduous forms of care work, both unpaid care work and paid care work, and we also need to reduce the situations of dependency by promoting persons' autonomy. So we need to increase persons' autonomy so that they are less dependent on others' care work. Third, once this is the care that we have recognized and that we need because we have get rid of precarious care arrangements, so what we are going to do with the care provision that we still need to provide, we need to redistribute it. We need to redistribute caregiving tasks and also to redistribute the resources required to satisfy care needs. And we need to redistribute among all the citizenship. So we need a fair and a redistribution of care, of both the caregiving and the resources to cover our care needs, and we need to do so in a fair basis, let's say. And finally, we need to ensure that the leading actors of care systems are represented when making any decision on what we want to do about care and how we are going to ensure that any policy has a positive impact on care arrangements. So we need to ensure that they are legitimate representatives, that they are represented in policy making, let's say. Just to exemplify, to give a few examples on policies that could help to move towards these 4 R's of care. About recognition of care, we can think about, for example, introducing cuts in healthcare expenditure. So if we recognize care and if we put a monetary value on care or unpaid care work, we could see that many times cuts in healthcare systems are done thanks to the transfer of costs from the public care system, public health system into households. So if we reduce, for example, the budget that we spend in paying healthcare staff or in ensuring that someone stays at hospital for a few days after a surgery and send them earlier at home, we can consider that this is a saving of the hospital. But if we consider the unpaid care that needs to be done at home to compensate for the paid care work that is no longer done within the hospital, we could see that there is not a saving, but that there is a cost transfer. So recognizing care also means changing, let's say, our budget planning. Some policies that might reduce precarious care arrangements. Clearly ensuring women's access to sexual and reproductive rights, so that, for example, unwanted pregnancies do not happen. So that would be avoiding an unwanted care provision, avoiding that some teenagers, for example, some women have to do this type of care work that they were not looking to. And also another policy that might be mentioned here, for example, is ensuring the accessibility of public transport so that a person, for example, with reduced mobility can move around the city on her or his own and does not need anyone to take care of him around the city. So ensuring accessibility of public transport would reduce the dependency of people with reduced mobility. A policy that impacts the distribution of care is working day policies. For example, if we expand the working day, when are workers going to have time to do their own care and to answer to their care responsibilities? They will probably have to transfer this care responsibilities to other people who is not in the labor market or who is in the labor market in a subordinated position. So working day policies impact the distribution of care within households. And finally, when talking about representation, a critical issue is ensuring that domestic workers' organizations are considered and are represented when discussing the regulation of domestic work, which is a hot topic nowadays. So we need this two-pronged strategy, mainstreaming the 4 R's of care and ensuring that there is a comprehensive set of care policies, but beyond that, what we really need is to ensure that care is an axis of reproductive sustainable development models. So instead of what is happening today, when the care economy is the invisible base of market-led development models, what we need to ensure is that the production process, the market production process, serves the reproduction of well-being, so that the very reproduction of well-being is the main priority of this system, and this is sometimes referred to as moving towards a caring economy. So we need to move towards a caring economy to ensure that we've got a rights-based global care system. And finally, as I said at the beginning, we are facing a window of opportunity because care systems are already changing at the global level. We are witnessing critical phenomena such as demographic changes, for example, the population aging process I talked about earlier. We are facing also changes in gender roles. Women are worldwide fighting for their rights. We are also experiencing what we could call a crisis of care at the global level with different impacts in different countries, but at the global level we could talk about a crisis of care. And finally, we are experiencing a process of globalization of care. So care, the social organization of care is increasingly interdependent at the global level. What happens in some places of the world depends on what happens in other places of the world. Care workers are moving globally, etc. And global institutions have more and more to say in the way in which care is organized. So all those phenomena imply that care is more and more visible in the global development agenda. So let's say we cannot avoid any longer discussing about care. So care is more and more visible. So that's the moment to ask ourselves what kind of care systems do we envision for the future and how we are going to move toward those kind of envisioned care systems. And I will finish my presentation here so that we've got some time for comments and questions. I'm really looking forward to listening to your questions and your comments. And thank you very much for sharing this time with all of us, with all the training center. Thank you.
Okay, hello. Thank you very much, Amaya, for addressing so many interesting points about care economy. And yes, and as Amaya said, now it's time to open the Q&A section. And we encourage you to participate. You know, as I told you before, like either type in your questions in the box at the bottom of the console, and you can also raise your hand. So we will unmute your microphone. And yes, we encourage you, and while you think your questions and comments, I will share my screen because there is some of you that have already write one question. The first question is from Ximena Loza. She asked, can you explain the difference between care policies and care systems? Is the second an example of the first?
Okay, so Ximena, thanks a lot for your question. Yeah, well, the notion of care system refers to the overall way in which any given society organizes care. So it refers to what are care needs and what are the actors that are providing care. So the actors can be the state, public institutions, but also households, also private companies can play a role in care provision, and also the community. So the notion of care systems is a much broader notion than care policies. Care policies would be a part of care systems. So that would be a part of care systems that refer specifically to the role played by the state. However, it is true that in some countries and in some places we are talking about care systems to refer to public care systems, let's say, to refer to this set of public care policies that are implemented in this kind of coordinated and comprehensive way. So in some, for example, in Uruguay, they talk about the care system, to the Uruguayan care system, to refer to a set of care policies. But I was using the notion of care system in a broader sense, to include all the role played by all actors, and also to refer to the need for care of this society. So they are different concepts, and mostly I've used them with different meanings. But as I said, in some countries you can find that care systems is a notion that is referring specifically to a set of public policies, of coordinated public policies that are implemented to answer to certain care needs, for example, the care needs of the elderly, or etc. So hope it was clear. If not, please ask me again. Yeah.
The next question is by Jung Karajong. Sorry, because I don't know the correct pronunciation. And there are two questions. You want to read them, or? The first one is, could you recommend some key authors or articles of the topic of the right to care? And the second one is a different one, so maybe you can ask the first one.
Yeah, I wonder that Ji Jung Karajong is not a participant in the care course. Yeah, there's the notion of the right to care is increasingly used. It's, let's say, a new notion of care that we are trying to develop at the global level to bring together diverse dimensions, let's say, diverse dimension of this notion of the care right that I've just used were scattered in different rights, like, for example, in the right to health, the right to education, etc. So this is quite a new notion that we are trying to use and to develop, and there are public international institutions such as UN Women who are writing and who are advocating for the right to care. Also, there are some authors. For example, there's an Argentinian author, Laura Pautasi, who has written a lot on the right to care, on the topic of the right to care for the last 10 years, I would say. So yeah, there are authors and articles, but maybe you could write to the training center at the end of this lecture, and we can specifically recommend some readings. The training center itself, Young Women Training Center, who is organizing this lecture, has also some written material on the right to care, and also the progress of the world's women by Young Women. It also includes the notion of the right to care. And about your second question, how would you go about analyzing an elder care policy through a human rights and/or capability approach? I would say first that what we need is to analyze any care policy, including elder care policy, through the lens of the right to care. This means, for example, I would say that this means that when thinking about the elderly, we need to think about the right to receive the care they need, but also about the right they should still have to provide care for others and to provide care for themselves. So, for example, we should include not only the objective of providing needed care, but also of promoting their autonomy. their mental and physical autonomy. So, which would imply that they are still active in social life, including providing care for others, whether it is for their friends, for their neighbors, for their grandchildren, for their own daughters or sons. So not thinking about the elderly as as dependent people, as passive people in need for care, but also thinking about them as people who might be active in social and economic networks. Second, I would say that we need to think about the right to care and ensure that this does not violate labor rights in the care sector. So the right to care of elderly people should be guaranteed at the same time as we guarantee labor rights of care workers who are providing this care, be it in a residence or be it at home as some kind of domestic assistance support, or be it domestic workers, so that we need to take into account the right to care and the labor rights of a different set of people and not thinking about the elderly in isolation. Again, coming back to the example of Uruguay, they've got what they call a care system, as I was saying, and they have two, among other dimensions, they deal with the right to receive care of the elderly, and at the same time they deal with labor rights in the care sector of those who are providing this care. So yeah, I would say this by now.
The next one is from Jean-Marie Godoy. Can you please name some countries that are leading with example regarding care policies, and please share with us what they have done regarding redistribution, for example? I've heard good things about Northern Europe countries, Germany and Uruguay.
Yeah, there are many countries which are trying to innovate and to give some steps in this topic. I will begin by the last one that you mentioned, Uruguay. As I said, Uruguay is probably one of the most active countries in Latin America in terms of care policies. First of all, we should say that in Uruguay, a very enriching encounter between the feminist movement, the academia, and public institutions has happened. So let's say gender advocates coming from the feminist movement, from the academia, and from public institutions have come together to encourage this kind of care system, of public care system, of public care policies. So Uruguay is a good example from the very beginning up to the point that they are developing this type of comprehensive care policies in which they deal at the same time with labor rights in the care sector, ensuring labor rights in domestic work, but also a professionalization process of care workers. The second pillar is elderly care, and the third pillar is child care. So Uruguay would be a good example, but there are also other good examples in Latin America. For example, Ecuador has done a good job in diverse dimensions. For example, in improving domestic workers' living and working conditions. They have changed the law regarding domestic work, paid domestic work, and they have also implemented mechanisms to ensure that the law was fulfilled. Because what happens in domestic work frequently is that you might have a good law, good rules, let's say, but they are not observed. So Ecuador has done good in terms of domestic workers' rights. And also it has done good in terms of the right to receive care of people with disability. From the first step that they did was to identify who were those people, how many people were had a disability in Ecuador, what type of disability, where they were living, with whom, what were the resources they had. So they did quite a long and in-depth process of identifying who were those with disabilities and what type of care they needed. So, and it took them more than 1 year to, they went, let's say, house by house, and they talked to every single person with a disability in the country. So first of all, they clearly identified the situation, and after that, they were able to identify some measures to answer to this need. Also, of course, northern countries in Europe are very good in terms of care policies. Mostly in terms, for example, they are really good in terms of work-life balance policies, and in terms of maternity, paternity, and parental leave. There's a huge discussion in terms of whether we should promote more maternity leave or paternity leave or parental leave. Parental leave is this leave that can be shared by both parents, the mother and the father, or if there are two mothers or two fathers. And the problem with this type of parental leave is that usually it is women who finally benefit from it. So let's say if a couple is given 8 months leave to take care of their children, it is usually the woman who takes these leaves. And this has an impact in terms of her labor insertions, a negative impact in terms of her professional career. But there are some countries, and among them, for example, Iceland and Norway, in which part of this parental leave is non-transferable, so that it is not the couple who can decide who will benefit from it, but in Iceland, for example, 1/3 goes to the mother, 1/3 goes to the father. And if the father doesn't want to enjoy from it, he just loses it. And the other third can be enjoyed by any of them as they decide. So northern countries are really good in terms of paternity, maternity, and parental leave, but some other countries are also doing improving in terms of those kind of work-life balances. There are also some countries which are taking seriously the issue of domestic work, for example, and that are improving the legislation of domestic work. For example, a critical issue here is a new ILO convention, Convention 189 on decent work for domestic workers. This was approved at the global level in 2011, and this has been ratified by a handful of countries. So there are some countries that are taking seriously this point. And some Asian countries are taking seriously population aging. For example, in Korea, in South Korea, a new insurance for the elderly has been created so that they try to ensure that the elderly can access the care they need. Other examples that I wouldn't say are good practice, but rather we could discuss this, but rather the opposite. In some Asian countries, for example in China, new rules have been passed that according to those rules, adult children are in charge of taking care of their elderly parents, and if they do not do so, they can go to jail or they can be fined. So let's say the right of the elderly to receive the care they need has been guaranteed at the expense or thanks to the imposition of care provision into adult children, regardless the impact that this has in their lives. So yeah, the situation is extremely diverse at the global level, and we've got good examples and we've got also bad examples. I can see that there are many questions, so I will try to be more brief.
And the next one is from Valentina. She says, would you go through the puzzle on moving forward slide again, particularly the right to care notion? Thank you.
Yeah, I will try to very briefly explain that slide again. What I was saying was that currently we are living in what we can call unjust care systems, and that we need to change that situation and move forward towards what we could call a rights-based global care system. Please note that I'm talking about a global care system, not about care systems in plural, because we understand that the social organization of care is extremely interdependent at the global level. So we cannot solve care problems in a single place of the world without making changes in the way in which care is organized in other places of the world. So we need, let's say, global coordination. And this type of envisioned care system that could ensure universal access to decent care should be based in two pillars. First, the right to care, and second, co-responsibility. And the notion of the right to care means that all of us, we should have first access to the care to receive the care we need, depending on our life circumstances and on the moment of the life cycle in which we are. So it's not the same when I'm a child than when I'm adult, that if I'm got an illness or a disability of I'm 85 years old, let's say. But along all my life, I need care. Sometimes the right to receive care just means that I have time to take care of myself. But and that I've got the material conditions to take care of myself. So the right to receive care, and also the right to choose whether you want to care for others or not. So this means that if you want to care, be it for your children, for your parents, for other family member, or even we could talk about taking care of other friends or neighbors, whatever, that you can do it in decent conditions. So that would be another right. And finally, the right to reject care provision if it hinders your ability to enjoy from other rights, so that you do not have to take care of your adult parents, for example, if it implies that you need to leave your job. So the combination of these three rights, let's say the right to receive, to care in decent condition, and to reject care if it hinders your ability to enjoy other rights, all these three dimensions make up the right to care. And the right to care is the pillar, the first pillar of the fair care system that we want to build in the future. And this goes hand in hand with co-responsibility, because if all of us, we enjoy our right to care, it's also because all of us, we are assuming our share of responsibility in care provision, because we are, as we said, interdependent. It's not just a matter that the state does everything, it's a matter that all of us are involved, of course, with a critical and a very active role of the state and public institutions, but beyond that, that all of us, we pull our weight. Yeah, Alba?
Okay, next question is from Giselle Dovey. She says, just a contribution. It's true that population is younger in Africa, but taking care of elder people is becoming a serious problem in Africa too. I don't know if you want to answer or...
No, just wanted to say that, Giselle, you are absolutely right, and thanks for the clarification. As I said, population aging is a problem worldwide in all countries of the almost all countries of the world, although at different paces, let's say, and that population aging is happening even quicker in developing countries in the global south than in the global north. So yeah, of course, you are absolutely right. Thanks.
And there are two more questions. One is from Maria. As far as I understand, notion of care economy comes from relatively wealthy Scandinavian countries. What do you think is at stake when globalizing such notion?
I'm not sure whether I understand what Maria is saying. I wouldn't say that the notion of the care economy comes from wealthy Scandinavian countries. For example, in Latin America, it's a notion that is widely used. Even, I would say even more, because the care economy, the notion of the care economy tries to bring to light work that is usually not taken into account, because it happens mostly outside from markets, outside from the market economy. So I mean that care work, the bulk of care work is usually unpaid, so it is not considered to be work according to the orthodox notion of the economy, to the market-focused notion of the economy. So according to the orthodox notion of the economy, we would take care work into account only when it happens within the public sphere, be it in the public sector or in the private sector. But we won't take care work into account if it happens outside from paid employment. So the notion of the care economy tries to bring to light all these invisible unpaid care work, and also to ask about the interrelationship between this invisible base and the market economy, and to understand how care work and care provision moves from this invisible unpaid base into the public or the private sectors and becomes paid employment. So trying to broaden the notion of the whole economy, and to understand that the economy, as I said, is about reproducing life and sustaining life, whether within the market or outside the market. This expansion of the notion of the economy, I wouldn't say that it comes from wealthy countries, and even more than that, there's more time devoted to unpaid work in the global south than in the global north. In the global north, there's a lot of unpaid work. So unpaid work does not disappear with income level, not at all. But it is even, I would say, more important in the global south. What we should ask here is about the difference between the care economy and subsistence economy. There are some people who still want to make a difference between the care economy and subsistence economy, so that they try to understand what tasks that are done by women in global south countries can be, what of the tasks they do can be understood as subsistence work, and what of those tasks should be understood as care work. So here we've got a discussion on the differences or similarities between care work and subsistence work, so the subsistence economy and the care economy. But maybe Maria could explain a bit more what she was trying to say, because maybe I'm missing something here, probably. So.
Okay, we still have 5 more minutes, so, and we have one question written, but also I think that Cam wanted to share a comment or a question with you. Is that right, Cam? Okay.
Yes, I just have a quick question.
Okay, thank you. Oh, we cannot listen
I
to
should
you.
go to Edna's question and then Cam?
Yeah, maybe we go to Edna's question and after we go to Cam's question. Okay.
Okay, so Edna asks to elaborate a bit more on the 4 R's, especially on the last R for representation. Well, I will focus on the 4 R, representation. It is very common that decision making is done without listening to those who will be most impacted by those policies. And this happens with any policy, but this happens especially about care policies. So decisions over care policies and care interventions are frequently made without listening both to those who are currently providing care and those who are who will be the recipients of that type of care. For example, I can talk about an example in Spain, and Alba, or maybe Alba could talk more about this because she's an expert on that, how what is called the dependency law in Spain, which was aimed at guaranteeing the right to receive care of people in situation of dependency, mostly the elderly and people with disabilities. This law was approved with was going to be approved without listening either to the elderly and to the elderly organizations, without listening to people with disabilities and their organizations, and also without listening to women who were the care providers of this type of care. So when saying that we need to ensure representation, what we say is that we must guarantee that those who are the leading characters in care provision and in care reception are listened to when making any decision that will impact their lives. This is also critical when talking about domestic work. Many regulations leading with the domestic work sector have been approved without listening to domestic workers' organizations. For example, because domestic workers are not organized in trade unions, and only trade unions are considered to be legitimate actors in decision making. So what we are saying in this 4R is that we need to give voice to those who are most impacted by those policies that we are discussing.
Mm-hmm.
Alba,
Okay,
do you want to elaborate a bit on that?
I was more focusing on the questions because
okay.
I missed one of those because Victor wrote a question before and I missed that question, and also we have Edna and Cam, and we have only 1 minute to finish, so I don't know if you want me to read all the questions and you answer. No. You go one by one?
No, we can move to Victor's and also to Cam because we have already done Edna's.
Okay, yeah. Victor, no, I mean Rudaba and Victor, okay, yeah. Victor, could you also explain please more about what do you mean in terms of the crisis of care at the global level? Also, can we talk about care services as a sector of the economy that if managed properly could support job creation and growth?
Okay, we are running out of time, so I will be very brief. When talking about a crisis of care, we mean that there is an imbalance between the need for care at the global level and our ability to provide for this care in good conditions, so that we are unable to provide decent care for all at the global level. This has to do with changes in care needs, for example, the population aging process, and also to changes in care provision, for example, linked to women's insertion into the labor market. But on a broader sense, what we can say is that in market-led development models, it is really difficult that the whole population can enjoy from decent care arrangements. So in a sense, a care crisis, in the sense that people cannot access the care that they need and cannot access decent care, is in a sense structural to certain development models. So we can use the notion of a care crisis, a global care crisis, in terms of a more temporary imbalance between care needs and care provision, and some countries are enjoying from the care work done by migrant domestic workers, for example, or migrant care workers, and this implies that the crisis of care moves towards their country of origin. So they are no longer there to provide the care they were providing. So who will provide this needed care? So the care crisis moves worldwide, let's say. So we can talk finally about a care crisis in more temporary terms or in more structural terms. But in any of those cases, a care crisis refers to an imbalance between care needs and provision, and about the inability to access decent care for the majority of the population. And sorry, about the second question, yes, in fact, if it is done ensuring that the right to care is guaranteed at the same time as labor rights in the care sector, in fact, promoting care services, mostly public care services, can be a way of job creation, mostly for women, and also, if we want to look at it in that way, of economic growth. Yeah, you're right. And Young Women has a few fact sheets on that, specifically on childcare as a way of promoting job creation and economic growth. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read the last question because Cam decided to to save the question for next discussions. So because we are on time, Rudaba, she says it seems like it is not enough for governments and other actors to know that care is the right thing to do and to move towards a human rights-based approach and gender equality perspective, as progress is very slow. Many people hear gender equality and feminism and they already shut down. How can we build the business and development case and really combine care actors and propel them into action? Nice question to finish.
Yeah, a nice and difficult question to answer. We might use arguments such as the one that we were just mentioning, that expanding public care services can help to create jobs, and this fuels the whole economic structure, and therefore it might have a positive impact on economic growth. And we also can use other types of arguments in terms of policy, of political benefits. I just wanted to refer, there's one project which is called Interactions, that has been run by a few institutions, among them the International Development Studies Institute, I think it is the name. If you Google interaction and paid work, you will find it. And it was a project specifically on how to make care visible in the public policy agenda. So they specifically wonder what were the conditions that helped to make this business and development case. So, and in different countries, they had different findings, of course, but at the same time, for example, I remember that they reached the conclusion that we already know enough about care, that what we now need to do is to use the data we've got to make these kind of cases. So I would suggest you looking at that project, Interactions, again, making unpaid work visible in the public policy agenda. I think that's the name. And there you will find some more reflections specifically on the question you are asking. So thanks, Rudaba, and thanks to all of you for your questions.
Okay, so we don't have more time. We are going to finish the discussion here for today. We encourage you to participate in the next online lecture. So I would like to remember you that next Tuesday, 30th of May, at the same time at 9 o'clock New York time, Boran Lee will be with us. She's from the Women's Refugee Commission, and she will deliver an online lecture on caregiving and the intersection of gender and disability. So thanks, Amaya, for your presentation, and thanks everybody for coming, and see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.